in the rotation arrangement with all the brothers who have gone from the district work to circuit work, and then society now has a 2-year rotation system that will stay in effect. Of course, whether we have 2 years even for the next complete rotation is hard to say. Now for the subject, what is your reason for serving Jehovah? We dare say if we polled each of you here in the audience, we would come up with a couple of different reasons. And those reasons would be based perhaps on your age and your experience in the New Order society. What those reasons are and how profound that reason you might present is, we will learn as we project ourselves this evening into a situation we might feel we're familiar with, but let's examine it in depth. Genesis, the account in the Garden of Eden. We find in chapter 2, Jehovah God in verse 15 took the man, settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and take care of it, and he laid this command upon the man: from every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction, but as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for in the day you eat from it you will positively die. Now, he didn't say fly and he didn't say fry. He simply said die. That was the pronouncement, wasn't it, of sentence. Jehovah God then went on to say, it's not good for the man to continue by himself. I'm going to make a helper for him as a complement of him. Now Jehovah God was forming from the ground every wild beast of the field, every flying creature of the heavens, and he began bringing them to the man. That is, as he was creating them, he would have them then brought to man to see what he would call each one. And whatever the man would call it, each living soul, that was its name. So the man was calling the names of all the domestic animals and the flying creatures of the heavens and every wild beast of the earth. Now, we give emphasis there before we go on because some of us visualize in the New Order that all the wild animals are going to be in our backyard. And they're not going to be wild anymore. Well, that's not so. There will always be wild animals that will prefer their own kind to humankind. And there will be animals that can be domesticated or trained for useful labor and would prefer the companionship to man than being off to themselves in the wilderness. However, the communication will be there with the wild animal kingdom that we don't have now because of fear. Now he brings those animals before him, but Adam noticed something in verse 20. It says, for the man there was no helper as a complement to him. Complement in Latin, the combination of words means not being filled. In other words, Adam could see he did not have a full complement to himself. The other animals came before him and there were mates. But for him, there was no complement. He wasn't full. He felt something was lacking. So we have the first surgery performed in the history of man. Verse 21, Jehovah God had a deep sleep fall upon the man. And while he was sleeping, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh over its place. Now, why a rib to make Eve? Well, some Bible commentators like to say, well, the rib is the closest bone to the heart, and so Jehovah had the woman formed from there because it's close to his heart. Well, that's a romantic idea, but it's not factual. The reason Jehovah God no doubt took from the rib is because the rib is the only bone in your body that will grow back when it has been removed. So by Jehovah God taking a portion of the rib, Adam would still be a complete and perfect organism because that rib would grow back into place. Now, how did he know that Jehovah took a rib and was going to form the woman? Well, Jehovah must have revealed it to him either in vision or after his sleep spoke it to him. Jehovah proceeded to build the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman and to bring her to the man. And can you imagine Adam now when he sees not another animal coming before him, No, but bone of my bones, he says, flesh of my flesh. This one will be called Isha, or woman, or womb man, literally, because from the Ish in Hebrew, the Ish, or the man, she was taken. It's very interesting, the combination of words there. Isha, a man with a womb, W-O-M-B, a womb man, and that's how we get our English word, a woman. The B is just left out of it. Isha, taken from the Hebrew word for man, Ish. Now something happened. The joy and bliss was not long lasting. Chapter 3, verse 1, the serpent, and it's a different word here in Hebrew than snake, because he wasn't yet a snake. Perhaps we'll know more about that in a few minutes. Now the serpent proved to be the most cautious of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah God had made. And he began to say to the woman, is it really so that God, now there's the first hiding of God's name. He didn't say Jehovah, he said God. The first purposeful setting in the background of the name. Is it really so that God has said that you must not eat of every tree of the garden? But this the woman said to the serpent, well, of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but as for the eating of the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden, God has said you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it for fear you may die. Well, this the serpent said to the woman, you positively not die? God knows in the very day you're eating from it, your eyes are bound to be open and you're bound to be like God, knowing good and bad. Now, it often occurred to me when I first got the truth, and it bothered me a little bit. Why didn't Eve know a serpent couldn't talk? How could she fall into this type of a situation? Well, I rationalized in my own mind, well, the only reason perhaps is because she was only on the earth a little while. She'd have no way of knowing that a serpent didn't have a vocal box. She wasn't a trained student in zoology and biology as was Adam, yes. But the aid to Bible understanding projected something new and quite startling on that subject. It suggests, and it says, we have no way of knowing for sure, but as you read those words in the Spirit, we read them. You can just see it in your mind, the possibility that the serpent was eating of that forbidden tree when he was talking to her. He was actually eating of that tree, perhaps while he was talking to her. So when he says, you'll not die, he could say it because he was eating the fruit there and he wasn't dead. And besides, what would automatically happen in Eve's mind? Well, a serpent can't talk. And yet when that serpent ate of the tree, it was able to talk. And then the devil, you see, appealed to that logic, saying, well, now, if a lowly serpent can talk after eating of that tree, you know what could happen if you ate of it. That's why God doesn't want you to eat of that tree. He knows you'll be like him. And so the idea was desirable to Eve. And she ate of that tree. So Satan had a powerful argument there. If he was actually eating of that tree, a very convincing one. Then you become like God, knowing good and bad. Now, some of us still do not comprehend that statement. We often hear those of us on Bible studies still giving the wrong teaching on that. It didn't mean that now they would know bad and good. They knew what was good and bad before they ate of the tree. They knew it was good not to eat of the tree, and they knew it was bad if they ate of it. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Hebrew there, word for knowing, would give the indication that they would now have the authority to choose for themselves what was good and bad. Jehovah not telling them what to do. They could be as God, dictate their own course. And that appealed, apparently, to Eve. Now, that's important to remember. We're going to come back to that. So she gets Adam, and they both eat of the tree. Well, verse 8, what transpires? Well, what transpires is the first judicial hearing in the history of man. And the same pattern we will read here is still followed to this day by a judicial committee in the Christian congregation. They heard the voice of Jehovah God walking in the garden about the breezy part of the day. That's evening. And the man and his wife went into hiding from the face of Jehovah God, in between the trees of the garden. And Jehovah God kept calling to the man and saying, "Where are you?" Now note, first of all, it says he called, and then it says he kept calling. Verse 8, the voice called, and then verse 9, he kept calling. A judicial committee, if they know there is sin, if they have witnesses, they will call individuals to a hearing. If they don't answer the first time, they do not automatically disfellowship those persons. They keep calling like Jehovah did. Perhaps something happened, they couldn't show up. Or maybe they'll have a change of heart. Maybe that night they're too nervous and scared and they don't want to come. Well, the brothers realize that, so they'll keep calling a couple of times at least. In this case, Jehovah kept calling. Then Adam answered. Now, why did Jehovah God ask where they were? He knew where they were. Well, we'll find out why he asked a couple of things here. Well, I was in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat? Now, Jehovah God knew he ate of the tree. Why did he ask him a question like that? Why would a congregation committee, when they already had witnesses to... Why, that would not be a significant statement. So the serpent would now go on its belly. It would be a snake. And dust is what you'll eat all the days of your life. Well, the snake doesn't eat dust. No. What Jehovah God is pointing out here is that following the rebellious course of the original serpent, the devil, is like eating dirt. We'll only die. Dirt does not sustain life. Rebellion will not sustain life either. Then in verse 15, 5 parties are brought into a covenant. I, that's one, Jehovah, shall put enmity between you, that's the devil, and the woman, that's his wifely universal organization 3, and between your seed, the devil's seed, visible and invisible, that's 4, and her seed, that's 5, Jesus Christ and 144,000. And he will bruise you in the head, and you will bruise him in the heel. Now, the Hebrew word there for bruise is shuf. And it doesn't mean a little bruise like we picture in English. It means smash, crush. Now, Jesus was crushed in his heel, not just bruised, wasn't he? He was out of activity, out of commission for parts of 3 days. He couldn't get up. And that's the first prophecy of a resurrection in the Bible, because he did get up. And Satan would not die a natural death because he then in turn would be crushed, smashed, bruised in the head. And then to the woman he says, I'll greatly increase the pain of your pregnancy. Now, sometimes we say in the New Order there'll be no pain. That's not true. Here, the Bible says to Eve, he would increase the pain of her pregnancy. Pain is a protection. God has sensors under our skin to relay pain, hot, cold. We have to have that. If we didn't, we could be a perfect creature and put our hand in the fire and say, well, isn't that an interesting development? Look how the flesh is falling off my bones. Well, no, Jehovah God had to put pain sensors so that we would know better than to damage the body he gave us. And a pregnant woman, what an alarming thing it would be if the child was born without her even knowing it was coming. Jehovah God had to have a certain measure of pain to allow mother to prepare for the advent of that baby. So Jehovah God's curse was the increase of pain, which many of you mothers have experienced. And to the man, the curse was, instead of the ground serving him, he would have to serve the ground by the sweat of his brow. Verse 22, Jehovah God then went on to say, here the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. Now in order that he may not put his hand out and actually take the fruit also of the tree of life and eat it and live forever. What's that? There's an indication there. Had Adam and Eve gotten in and eaten that tree of life, they might have been alive with us today as evildoers. Because God's word is so sure. When he says something, it comes to be. There is no turning of it back. And his word was, that was a tree of life. No magical powers to it. It was his word that gave the power. So he had to get them out. So we read, with that Jehovah God put him out of the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he had been taken. They drove the man out and posted at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubs and the flaming blade of the sword that was turning itself continually to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, why the east of the garden? How about the other entrances, north, west, and south? Couldn't they sneak in that way? We have to conclude there was no other entrance. The aid of Bible understanding projects the thought that perhaps it was surrounded by sheer inaccessible cliffs. We don't know. All we know is the Bible said there was only one entrance. So it must have been the only way Adam and Eve could have gotten into the Garden of Eden, so he puts cherubs there. Now, why cherubs, plural? Wouldn't one cherub do it? Couldn't one angel keep out Adam and Eve? Well, there was someone else to keep out, wasn't there? Satan, the devil. One angel could keep out Adam and Eve, but how about the devil? Well, angels can fight. There's a possibility that one angel could have overpowered that angel who was guarding. Satan could have overpowered him perhaps and still led Adam and Eve back to the tree of life. Or he could have overpowered him another way, seducing his mind. He did it to angels later, didn't he? He may have convinced that angel to let him in so that he could get Adam and Eve to the tree of life. So Jehovah God puts more than one angel. Why? To keep him from being overpowered, we don't know how many, he says cherubs plural, and as a protective association to one another so Satan could not seduce their minds. And brothers and sisters, if the angels needed that association to keep the devil from overtaking their minds, what in the world do we need? You see why we need our meetings? Protect one another's thinking from the influence of our adversary. So more than one angel was put at the garden's entrance with the flaming blade of the sword. Now we get to the original question. What is your reason for serving Jehovah? Well, why is it so profound? Find out. What was Eve's reason for serving him? Well, as we think about it, if we would have asked those of you here this evening what your reason was, some of you younger persons and some of you new in the truth, you may have answered, well, I'm serving Jehovah because I don't want to die at Armageddon. Well, that's a reason. But then there would have been another answer given by some of you here. When you were asked what is your reasons for serving Jehovah God, you would have said, I'm serving Jehovah because I love him. Now that's a profound difference. Can you see why? What apparently was Eve's reason for serving Jehovah? The minute she found out she wouldn't die, she went ahead and ate of that tree. So is it a great reason to serve Jehovah so we don't die? No, because then all we have to be convinced is that we won't die and then we stop serving him. Apparently that's what happened to Eve. Now if Eve served Jehovah God because she loved him, Satan could have convinced her, just as he did, oh no, you can eat of the tree and you won't die, and it wouldn't have made the slightest difference. Because Eve would have said, well, no, I love my Father, and I'm not going to do what he said not to do. It's true, I may not die, but I love my God. I wouldn't hurt him like that by disobeying him. So the answer had a profound effect on her destiny as to what her motive was. Now, what is your motive in serving him? If it's simply because you don't want to die, what's going to have you serve him after the tribulation, once you've made it into the new order of things? There's eternal life ahead of us. And more importantly, turn to Revelation, the 20th chapter. In verse 7, we read, "Now as soon as the 1,000 years have been ended, Satan will be let loose out of his prison. He will go out to mislead those nations in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. And the number of these is as the sand of the sea. And they advanced over the breadth of the earth, encircled the camp of the holy ones and the beloved city. But fire came down out of heaven and devoured them." Now, sometimes it's puzzling. We ask, how in the world is Satan the devil, after 1,000 years of rule by Jesus Christ, ever going to convince anybody who had paradise the last 1,000 years not to serve Jehovah? Well, think about it. Some coming back in the resurrection, what will they have observed about those who do not serve Jehovah? They'll observe, this arrangement's pretty strong. I better stay with it. I notice those who go against the Sarim, or the princes, they die. I better bide my time and be careful and do what they say, because I don't want to die. I better serve this Jehovah so I don't die. After all, that's the instructions. Now Satan the devil's released after the 1,000 years. And somehow or another, we don't know, and what even scheme he'll have, we don't know. But supposing he could convince all of these persons who have come out of the grave, no, it's all over now. They don't have that kind of power anymore. You don't have to serve Jehovah any longer, and I can prove it to you. You won't die. Now the hordes come after him. Why? Because of their motive. Their reason for serving Jehovah is because they didn't want to die. But how about those who loved him? If Satan convinces the hosts of humanity here on the earth, no, you won't die if you stop serving him now, I can prove it. We'll reply, no, it doesn't matter to me one way or another. I'm serving my God Jehovah because I love him. Get away from me, Satan. I don't want anything to do with your arrangement. Do you see how important then it is to ask yourself, what is your reason for serving Jehovah? Well, if it is simply because you don't want to die, that's all right. None of us want to die. But come to know our Father, pray to him, and develop the most important reason. What is that? I'm serving my God Jehovah because I love him. Let that be your reason. Your brothers and sisters have displayed a great love for your God this week. Thus far, we've just had fine numbers in the field ministry.